So, you want to start a mindfulness practice, but you're not quite sure where or how or even what to do. Well, you're not alone, and there are books that can help with that. Come on, let's learn. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Mindfulness Voyage. My name is Ted Meissner, and thank you so much for being here. I'm glad you could join us today. And you may notice that occasionally I will have episodes where I'm interviewing authors and researchers about their work, and today it's a combination of both of those. Now, recently I had the opportunity to be on a retreat with 200 teachers from 27 different countries, and this guest, today's guest, Willem Kuyken, was one of the people who was there. And although I've known Willem for many years, he's been on my previous podcasts, we got to spend some time together, and it was just such a deep appreciation for getting to know a little bit more about him and his work and his presence. And that's why I want to share this with you today. So without further ado, let's talk to our guest today, Willem Kuyken.
Our guest today is Willem Kuyken. Thank you so much for being here. Good to see you again.
Lovely to see you. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Yeah. And we actually got to see each other quite a lot. We were just on retreat together, so it's a very different experience. Having been in person with you for several days, I'm just very grateful for that opportunity to have a little bit of time with you then. But let's talk about what we're going to talk about today. But I first want to start by saying this is your technically third book, but we'll consider it a second one here. You had a previous one with Christina Feldman. I'm wondering if you'd say just a little bit about that first before we dive into this new book.
So the previous book with Christina Feldman, Mindfulness, Ancient Wisdom Meets Modern Psychology, was an attempt to represent our relationship over the last 7 years of teaching mindfulness from the perspective of the Dharma or Buddhist psychology, Christina Feldman, and psychological science, myself. And so what Christina and I were trying to do in that book was to really show the confluence of ancient wisdom and modern psychology in helping us to understand the mind and how mindfulness training can help people support their mental health, their well-being, and their lives more broadly.
Thank you for that overview, because that leads into what we're going to be talking about today, your new book, Mindfulness for Life, and that it's got a bit of a different tone to it. And for those who are watching or listening to this podcast, I do have a link to pre-order that. It's on pre-order as of this recording. It will be available for those who are listening to this much later on. But this is a different kind of book. And I'm wondering, Willem, if you'd say a little bit about how this is different than the other one and what prompted you to write this particular book, because it's a very different style.
So the book is intended for anyone with an interest in learning mindfulness and anyone with an interest in deepening and furthering their mindfulness practice into their lives and throughout their lives. And I was given some very good advice by a writer before I started, which was to write as if I was having a cup of coffee with someone and speaking to them about mindfulness and the way it could be useful in their life. And that is very much the tone I've taken in the writing of the book. And so it should be incredibly accessible. It's been read by quite a few people. And it is essentially about that. How can people weave mindfulness into their lives for a lifetime?
And it's so good to hear you say that. That was good advice about like you're catching up with someone over coffee. That's how we do these podcasts, as you know, and these discussions, because it's authentic, it's sincere, it's what's arising for you in each moment.
Yeah.
So you mentioned early on in the book 3 keys to living well, and I'm wondering if you might take a moment to just give a quick overview of what those are.
Well, they're the kind of what I see as the 3 keys of mindfulness, and they've got obviously a very long lineage, both in Buddhism, but I think you can trace them into different branches of psychology as well. I think the first, which most people are familiar with, is awareness. and bringing awareness to our inner and our outer landscape. I think the second that is talked about less is what I call the attitudes of mindfulness. And what I mean here is a basic movement of befriending our bodies and minds. I think a lot of people feel like they live a short distance away from their body. They don't often contemplate the landscape of their mind. And what this key is talking about is, can we cultivate very intentionally a relationship with our own bodies and minds that is curious, that is kind, that has care, that has a sense of courage, that has, when necessary, a sense of effort, and when necessary, a sense of letting go. This is the second key, this sort of befriending our bodies and minds. And the third key you can describe as being either values or ethics, depending on your preferred language. But what's the compass that we have? What's the sense of true north that for us is something that shapes what we do, what we say, and how we live our lives? The retreat we just sat with John Kabat-Zinn, he invited us to think about what was our karmic assignment, which is quite kind of esoteric language, but essentially it's just inviting people to ask, what's important to me? How do I want to lead my life? And I would just, if I may, just finish my answer to this question with how I start the book, which is to say that, an average life around the world as of 2020 is 72 years, 4,000 weeks, 26,000 days. And I was on a hike a couple of years ago, and I came across this gravestone, which had a woman's name on it, and just one thing on her epitaph, which said, "A life well lived." And I spent the rest of the walk really with a sort of contemplation on, okay, if I've got those 72 years, 4,000 weeks, and 26,000 days on average, what a life well lived look like? And I think it's a life of awareness. It's a life lived aligned with my true north, which is going to be different for everybody, and a life where I'm cultivating constantly this relationship with my own mind, my own body, so that I can live that life. I don't know if that answers the question.
It does, and there are so many different layers to weave into this, which you've done in the book. Mm-hmm. That it's not just these three keys that are in their own ivory towers, they are interrelated.
Yep.
How they support each other, that narrative, like the story you just mentioned in the book. Mm-hmm. That's how this takes shape. And one of the things that you do throughout is you have real life examples by real life people in how these different keys fit together and ways in which they show up. So it's not just an idea that's out there and we have to struggle to grasp it. You show how people are integrating this. And I wanted to ask if in any of those stories that you put together so beautifully in the book, did any of those speak to you, connect with you on a personal level, or what sorts of things came up in the writing of the book that were meaningful to you personally?
The book is deeply personal. It's a reflection on all of my work to date, all of my reading to date, and it's a deep bow to the many people I've learned from and studied with in my life. But it's also, there are 4 case studies from different phases of life. There's a young man in his 20s, there's a woman in her 30s, there's another man in his 40s, and then there's a woman in her 70s, and it tracks them throughout their life. And they are, in a sense, composites of many people I have known, many experiences I've had myself, and they are intended to bring mindfulness to life through case studies, and not in cliched ways, in very gritty, everyday ways. And the way I did that was, every time something happened when I was teaching mindfulness or in my own life or in the life of a friend, I would say, "Oh, that's really interesting. Would you mind if I include that in the book?" And so the composites are, there is not, I hope there isn't an off note in there, because they are all in one way or another real. And I think people need to see that mindfulness isn't something that's out there, that isn't something about sitting in a beautiful natural setting. It's about how people live their lives, the good, the bad, and the really challenging, ugly, and difficult.
There also, throughout the book, you have different kinds of practices that you suggest for people who are reading through it. And I'm curious about any of those that are your go-tos that you use on a regular basis, maybe that have influenced your practice, and understanding that that can change from day to day. But what are some of the things that you remember most that are maybe some of your favorites or some of your most challenging that you do anyway because they're challenging?
So, if I may, I'd like to answer your question and then sort of zone out a little bit. I mean, there's one that I think is important and has been important in my life. And I've heard from many people going through mindfulness programs, they found this helpful as well. And the book is organized into how things are taught and learned in an introductory way, but then are deepened throughout their life. And so it's the appreciation practice. It's the practice of very intentionally bringing awareness to things in our life for which we might have a sense of joyfulness, a sense of appreciation, a sense of gratitude, an urge towards generosity, whatever it might be. But it's intentionally bringing awareness to that and staying with that and cultivating that sense of appreciation of those moments. And so that for me has been important. I've heard it be important for other people. Now, how do you then take that forwards into a deeper and a more sustained practice? One of the things I talk about in the book is beginning and ending the day. So when you put your head on the pillow at the end of the day, if you have some moments before you fall asleep, it's just to scroll back through the day and ask the question, what have I appreciated from today? What's brought me a sense of meaning, a sense of purpose, a sense of joy, a sense of connection, a sense of love? And sort of making a sort of mental note of that. And starting the day, perhaps in the informal practice or even informally as you're going to work or going to college, wherever you're going, and asking yourself, what's happening today that I've got a sense of appreciation for, that I'm looking forward to, that I want to make the time to drop into. Then if you go to the next level of taking it further, so the book is oriented so that you can do these things and then come back to them weekly, monthly, annually, every decade, whatever it might be. So just to take it, for example, on a sort of transition point, there's quite a lot in the book about transitions. So, we transition through puberty, we transition into our first important relationship, we graduate college, we graduate high school, we start our new job, we get married, we maybe get divorced. All of these are transition points where they are an incredible opportunity to bring awareness to this question of, in this last phase of my life, what have been the recurring themes in my appreciation practice? And then what I'm sort of arguing, and this is sort of drawing, I guess, on all sorts of theory, is that in a way, living a good life is not rocket science. It might actually be doing more of the things that give us a sense of purpose, more aligned with our true north, things that we have noticed come up again and again and again in terms of appreciation. So for me, it's my work. I'm very fortunate to love my work. I'm very fortunate to have family members that I love, friends that I love. I do a whole bunch of physical activities that give me a huge amount of joy. I ride a motorcycle. I know that's risky, but it gives me a lot of joy. And so it enables one to be much more intentional about those kinds of choices. So that would be my direct answer to your question. Ted, what I would say, though, stepping back, is that I think, the Buddha 2,500 years ago had a sort of formulation of different mind states and different personalities and different points of life require different meditation practices. And I think we need to move away from the idea of there are these sort of 3 or 4 practices that we do, and if we do them every day, that's going to be good for us. There's absolutely, of course, value in doing concentration practices that cultivate these attitudes of mindfulness. But actually, once people become more familiar with their own minds, their own bodies, their own lives, they can begin to choose, what do I need in this moment? Which practice is going to support me in this moment? I think that's probably a long enough answer for that question.
I think that's a very, very good one, especially around the idea of what is called for right now, what is going to be most helpful. And again, I say this frequently on this podcast and in my own classes. It's not necessarily the one you like the most. It may be a more challenging one for various reasons. Whatever those happen to be. We're complex beings. We have complex lives.
Yeah.
Paying attention to, if I do this, if we associate it with physical exercise, I might not want to do the sit-ups, but I like the effects of that and it's helpful, so I'm going to do that. And have a similar corollary in a mindfulness practice that may be more challenging for us because of circumstances.
What would be an example of that, Ted, where you have an experience of, actually, I don't really want to do this, but I know it's the right thing to do?
So as an example from my own life, loving kindness practice, one that has been very challenging for me. And there was a time in my life where it was not just challenging, it was really, really, really hard. It was bordering on dysregulating. With my circumstances in life at that moment. Also the one that was most helpful for me to process some hurt. Needing to be able to not just let go of the hurt in an avoidance and suppression kind of way. Processing of that hurt and turning that towards something that could still be uplifting even through great change and great difficulty.
It's a beautiful example. It's a beautiful example. And one that can manifest really a lot of benefits, can't it? Because you are inclining the mind towards an attitude that's going to not just support you, but support you in relationship to whatever that challenge is.
Exactly. And also uncovering some new nuggets of, at that time, before I had become an MBSR teacher and gone through teacher training, this is many years ago, is, there are different ways in which one might engage with a loving kindness practice. It's not just, here's the only one way, here's the script, if you will, for loving kindness. No, it can be lots of different ways to feel that tone of care, affection, friendliness, whatever it happens to be.
So if I can just riff off the back of that, Ed, one of the things I do in the book is explore, you talk about loving kindness practice, and when you say that to people in the sort of mindfulness world, they have an idea of what that means. But what I try and do in the book is to say that kind of practice of cultivating particular attitudes of mind can be incredibly flexible. That, it doesn't have to follow a particular structure. The intention is to cultivate the mind, cultivate an attitude of mind. And that attitude might be different at different times. For you, what you're saying is sort of kindness and loving kindness at a particular moment in time. But at another time, what might be particularly needed is the cultivation of courage, the cultivation of curiosity, the cultivation of effort. And so there was a time in my life just for a couple of years where I would, in my practice, have a period of practice where I'd say, may I be open, may I be courageous, may I be able to let go. And it was those three phrases together that just met what I needed to meet in my life at that moment in time. And I think that ability to go, gosh, what's needed in this moment? Which attitudes of mind are going to support me in this phase of my life, in this interaction, in this day, or whatever? I think it's that can be tremendously supportive of us in our lives.
Beautifully said. And what a great way to spotlight that there's not just one attitude of mindfulness. It's not just non-judgment there, and not just a set that people may be familiar with from John and his works. It can be things that are not on there, like courage, as you mentioned, others. So it's, again, what is an appropriate response that's helpful in the moment, and really being able to tune into what's needed is part of this dynamic of these different keys that you mentioned in the book.
It's interesting because, if you look at any of these attitudes, and I do this a little bit in the book, you can look at them quite deeply. So if you take courage, And you look at, for example, the etymology of the word courage, you get the word cœur in French, heart. And then you think of the old kind of British history and the idea of Lionheart and lion-hearted. And what you're cultivating is this quality of heart that can meet difficult things with a sense of lion-heartedness. And I think, and in that is a sort of acknowledgement of vulnerability and acknowledgement of fear and a movement towards, which I think these are incredibly rich explorations and incredibly useful explorations. And we're sort of, in a way, what I'm inviting people to do is to take them out of the kind of the certain guardrails. Guardrails are important, of course they are, but being able to think, what is needed? What is needed at this moment in my life?
So for those who are new to a practice, or not quite sure about this mindfulness stuff, what are some encouragements you might suggest for them as they start on this journey?
I guess people can come at mindfulness with a sort of project mindset, a sense of this is something that I have to do and I have to do well and I have to do right. And I think one of the most helpful ways of thinking about it is with these two ideas. The first is, in a way, sometimes when I'm teaching, I'll do this exercise where I say, well, what are the qualities of a good friend? And if you think about the good friends in your life, what would be the qualities that you would describe? And the list that's normally generated is absolutely amazing. So yeah, it's obviously kindness, it's a sense of non-judgment, a sense of got your back, a sense of telling you difficult stuff if you need to hear it. It's quite a long list. And what I think is a much better metaphor for mindfulness practice is becoming your own best friend, rather than going to the gym. Not to say that lots of people don't love going to the gym, and of course it has value, but a lot of people go to the gym and stop going to the gym. And a lot of people start mindfulness practice and stop going to mindfulness practice. But people tend not to abandon their best friend. Why? Because that's an incredibly valuable and valued relationship. So can we think about our mindfulness practice through the lens of this is my best friend? John Kabat-Zinn on the retreat we just sat, actually took that one step further and said it was like a love affair. And I totally get where John's coming from, because that's sort of infused with a sense of depth and a sense of passion, if you like. I think I'm using sort of best friend because I love its sense of longevity, and its sense of depth, and its sense of, with a really good friend, we know their flaws, but we still really value them as our best friend. So I think there's something about what we're doing in mindfulness practice is learning to really befriend our bodies and our minds like a best friend. And the other is, if you say to people, okay, what does a life well lived mean to you? Most people will pause and think about that question and have some really interesting answers. And then casting mindfulness training as a way of supporting them in living that life. So it isn't something they have to do or something that they're going to get told off by their teacher for we're not doing enough of. They're doing it because they are becoming their own best friend. And it is supporting them in living the life that they want to live. And that's really important, because for a lot of people, that's quite challenging, for all sorts of different reasons, whether that's habit or challenges in their lives, or just a sense that they don't have the space and the time to think about those things. So this sounds, in a way, the way I'm describing it, kind of straightforward, but the reality of it is really difficult, which is why I think we need to really provide scaffolding for people to learn these skills.
Anything else you'd like to share with the viewers before we let you get on with the rest of your day?
No, just I guess I would just maybe finish with a sort of aspiration or a hope that I have, thinking about the next few years of my life, that by 2050, some of the things that I talk about in the book and many other people talk about in sort of mindfulness programs and were spoken about on the retreat we just sat will seem commonplace. They'll seem everyday. In fact, the place where we were on retreat, just the food that was served there was food that most dietary programs, most public health physicians would say this is the kind of diet that people should be eating, both for their health, but also probably for the health of the planet. But what I found interesting about the centre was it seemed to be run in a way that was also incredibly supportive and mindful in a way of the staff who were there. So as you came in, the staff area was called the People and Culture Centre. And there was a real sense of, I'm going to use the word love amongst the staff group. I mean, I don't know that for a fact, but could that become more of the mainstream in how other organizations are run, how schools are run, how workplaces are experienced? And that seems a long way away from where we are now. But I think 50 years ago, the kind of food we were served there would have seemed a long way away. So I think this is a totally realistic aspiration. And my hope really is that the book is a small part of that project to make the world a more mindful place.
You had mentioned earlier transitions, and what you're just describing is a transition. We are in it now.
Absolutely.
We support that shift. That's the work before us and within us.
Absolutely.
Our guest today, Willem Kuyken. Willem, thank you so much for being here. For those who are listening, I'm going to have links to his books and a few other pages that will be of interest. So again, Willem, thank you so much for being here. Good to see you.
Thank you, Ted.
Thank you so much for being here today. I hope you got something out of today's episode, and great appreciation to Willem for sharing his insights. Remember, every moment you have a choice. Make it the best you can. I'll see you next time.